Good afternoon on this October 9th. I'm Yumna Naufal. These are today's headlines. The parents of the kidnapped soldiers back in August have allegedly received phone calls from an Islamic State militant giving the authorities a 3-day ultimatum to meet their demands. Parliament fails yet again to elect a successor to former President Michel Sleiman, leaving the country's top Christian post vacant since May. And the U.S.-led coalition continues airstrikes against ISIL as Pentagon official admits besieged Syrian city of Kobani could be taken. The parents of one of the soldiers taken captive by jihadists back in August have allegedly received a phone call from an Islamic State militant giving the authorities a 3-day ultimatum to meet their demands. The father of captive Muhammad Yusuf said he received the phone call from the IS fighter at 10 o'clock this morning and claimed that the militant said, quote, "You have 3 days or else you will lose your children." The families have been staging daily protests by blocking major highways across Lebanon over fears that their loved ones would be executed. 3 of the hostages have already been killed back in August and September. But on Wednesday, they moved to downtown's Beirut Riyadh al-Sulh Square, where the Grand Sarai is located, and vowed to hold an open-ended sit-in there. Health Minister Wael Abu Fawood visited the protesters, reiterating that the Progressive Socialist Party backs the swap of the hostages with Rumi prison Islamist inmates. Parliament has failed yet again to elect a successor to former President Michel Sleiman, leaving the country's top Christian post vacant since May 25th. The Speaker of Parliament, Nabi Bede, set a new session for October 29th. Now, Sleiman's 6-year term ended, but the rival MPs have so far failed to elect a new head of state over differences on their candidates. More than a dozen rounds of parliamentary sessions are not held due to lack of quorum caused by the boycott of several blocs. The boycotting lawmakers claim that there should be an agreement on a compromise candidate before heading to the polls. The army says that it has confronted an armed terrorist group that plotted to attack a military post on the outskirts of the northeastern border town of Arsel. In its communique, in a statement released this morning, they said that the military and the jihadists sought to attack the post after midnight, but soldiers engaged in gun battles with the terrorists, forcing them to withdraw from the area. The new United Nations envoy to Syria is calling for an urgent international response to the Islamic State group's assault on a Kurdish town near the Turkish border, saying the global community cannot sustain another city failing to the military group. Staffan de Mistura issued the demand for concrete action after Turkey's president declared that Kobani is on the brink of being captured.
The city of Kobani, on the northern border of Syria, close to Turkey, has been under siege now for 3 weeks. There were 400,000 inhabitants. They've been defending themselves. They're all Kurds. They've been defending themselves with great courage. But they are now very close to not being able to do so. They're fighting with normal weapons, whereas the ISIS has got tanks and mortars. The international community needs to defend them. The international community cannot sustain another city falling under ISIS. Turkey has been very generous in receiving more than 200,000 of its inhabitants. But what is needed now is concrete action. The world, all of us, will regret deeply if ISIS is able to take over a city which has defended itself with courage but is close to not be able to do so. We need to act now.
Secretary Kerry spoke with Prime Minister Davutoglu last night and again briefly this morning. Obviously, their conversation was broadly about the challenges we're all facing with the threat of ISIL and also certainly the situation in Kobani. As I mentioned, General Allen and Ambassador McGurk will be there later this week, and I expect the conversation will continue when they're there.
Is there any plan besides this 5,000 Syrian opposition?
We've undertaken multiple airstrikes in the Kobani area, including multiple strikes again last night. One airstrike south of Kobani destroyed 3 ISIL-armed vehicles and damaged another. Another strike southeast of Kobani destroyed an ISIL-armed vehicle carrying anti-aircraft artillery. 2 airstrikes southwest of Kobani damaged an ISIL tank. Another airstrike south of Kobani destroyed an ISIL unit. So just a brief update on that piece. There's also on the ground, several individual opposition groups have formed de facto coalitions in some of these towns, including those near the Turkish border, and they're working together to push back and hold back to the degree they can ISIL and their efforts that have been underway on the ground. One other piece, and then we'll get to your next question. I think as it relates to this, as I mentioned earlier, it's obviously horrific to watch what's going on the ground, but it's important for the United States, for us, to also step back and remember our strategic objectives as it relates to our efforts and our engagement in Syria. As you all saw, the President laid out a clear and comprehensive strategy for degrading and ultimately destroying ISIL. Our goal is to deny ISIL a safe haven from which they can stage attacks in Iraq and possibly plan attacks against U.S. interests. And so our focus is on undertaking, militarily I should say, is undertaking a deliberate, well thought out campaign in Syria to disrupt ISIL, specifically their command and control structures, destroy ISIL's critical infrastructure, attack sources of ISIL fuel and financing. And you've seen militarily that that has been the focus of our actions to date.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg held talks in Ankara with Turkish government officials to push for greater Turkish involvement in fighting Islamic State militants who have captured now a large swath of Iraq and Syria and are trying to take the Syrian town of Kobani near the Turkish border. Speaking at a news conference following the meeting with Turkish Foreign Minister Mehmet Cavusoglu, he welcomed the vote in the Turkish parliament last week, which gave the government new powers to launch military incursions into Syria and Iraq. Turkey's parliament also voted to allow foreign forces to use its territory for possible operations against ISIS. Stoltenberg said the alliance had deployed Patriot missiles in Turkey to enhance and strengthen the air defense. He also stressed that NATO stands ready to provide more support to Turkey if needed because that is part of the alliance and it's part of the collective security which the alliance is built on. Coming up next, Warren Buffett, the multi-billionaire, is so sure Hillary Clinton will win the presidency in 2016, he is betting his money on it. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching the 4:20 o'clock news on Future TV. U.S. President Barack Obama met with senior military officials at the Pentagon to discuss the military mission to defeat ISIS in Syria and Iraq. And he said that there is a consensus among the nations of the world that the Islamic State is a threat to world peace and that their barbaric behavior has to be dealt with immediately.
Our strikes continue alongside our partners. It remains a difficult mission. As I've indicated from the start, this is not something that is going to be solved overnight. The good news is that there is a broad-based consensus, not just in the region, but among nations of the world, that ISIL is a threat to world peace, security, and order, that their barbaric behavior has to be dealt with, and we're confident that we will be able to continue to make progress in partnership with the Iraqi government.
At least 43 people were killed when a powerful suicide bombing ripped through the Yemeni capital of Sana'a, plunging the violence-plagued state into further turmoil after weeks of political deadlock. Dozens more were wounded in the attack in Sana'a's Tahrir Square, which targeted a gathering for supporters of Shia insurgents who overran the capital last month. A separate suicide attack killed 20 Yemeni soldiers in the country's southeast in a car bombing suspected of having been carried out by al-Qaeda. Yemen has been racked by political turmoil and sporadic violence since the 2012 toppling of strongman Ali Abdullah Saleh, with rebels and militants battling to exploit the power vacuum and seize control of the territory. And members of the new Palestinian Unity government assembled in Gaza for their first cabinet session in the war-battered territory, a largely symbolic meeting meant to mark the end of absolute Hamas control of the coastal strip. Several of the ministers arrived in the Gaza Strip after traveling from the West Bank, including the new Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah. The gathering, set for midday, comes 3 days ahead of an international pledging conference where Western-backed Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will seek $4 billion for Gaza reconstruction following the 50-day war that this summer between Israel and Hamas took place. Hamdallah spoke hopefully of a new era between the militant Hamas movement and Abbas Palestinian Authority. The Unity Government of Independent Experts was formed 4 months ago to replace rival governments in separate territories, one led by Hamas in Gaza and the other by Abbas in autonomous areas of the West Bank. A candlelight vigil was held in Dallas, Texas, to remember the first person diagnosed with Ebola in the United States, Liberian national Thomas Eric Duncan. Duncan died in an isolation ward of a Dallas hospital 11 days after being admitted on September 28, underscoring questions about the quality of care he received. He had been in critical condition and on a ventilator and kidney dialysis at Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital. He was given an experimental medication to try to keep him alive starting Saturday, 6 days after being admitted. The case has stirred attention and concern that someone with Ebola has been able to fly into the United States from Liberia, raising the specter more passengers could arrive and spread the disease outside of West Africa, where nearly 4,000 people have died in 3 impoverished countries. Warren Buffett is so sure that Hillary Clinton will win the presidency in 2016, he is willing to wager some of his $58.2 billion net worth. Hillary is going to win, yes, Buffett, an outspoken Clinton supporter, said at Fortune's Most Powerful Women's Summit. I will bet money on it, and I don't do that easily. But while Clinton has said she's thinking about running for president, she has yet to announce it. But Buffett suggested that her announcement is a foregone conclusion. He has long supported Clinton and donated $2,000 to her Senate campaign in 2000. But the investor from Omaha, Nebraska, supported Clinton and then Senator Barack Obama in their fight for the Democratic nomination in 2008. He was less sure about which Republicans would run for president, but he said at the Fortune event. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our top stories. The parents of the captive soldiers by jihadists in August have allegedly received a phone call giving the authorities a 3-day ultimatum to meet their demands. The parliament fails again to elect a successor to former President Michel Sleiman, leaving the country's top Christian post vacant since May 25th. And the U.S.-led coalition continues airstrikes against ISIS as Pentagon official admits the besieged Syrian city of Kobani could be overtaken. Those are your Thursday headlines live on Future Television. We'll be back tomorrow for all the latest. Have a good one.
هتوصل على لبنان بأسرع وقت ممكن إن شاء الله.